I'm just texting Luke because we're having trouble getting the OB line up.
You know, we can send a mission to Mars and put a rover on Mars, but we can't talk to Luke Bona, 500 miles away. What's the catch, Simon?
I have no idea. So I'm just writing, we're in another studio, so for some reason, this is live texting, people, we are not able to hear you.
Perhaps he should work out of Melbourne, then it'd be much easier to touch base with him, wouldn't it?
Call on, and then I'll put in a phone number, 03...
Well, don't spread it on here, it's a private number.
8.
I hope to have Steve Price drop in during the week too, an old mate of ours who employed Bruce and Phil 25 years ago, much to his regret. And we'll talk about all the timely changes that are taking place and have a bit of a chat to Steve, which will be the first time in a long time.
Yes.
It's 22 past 10.
Now, in setting up the topic, which we will take after we've finished chatting with Luke, tell me, Phil, a couple of radio people who you have admired over the years.
Okay, the two Normans especially, from 3KZ, Norman Banks and Norman Swain. They're at opposite ends of the spectrum because Norman Banks, of course, was a fairly serious commentator, doing, programs like Voice of the Voyager and also the Maya Musical, a great footy commentator in his day, and there was a jack of all trades, could turn his hand to any aspect in radio.
Yes. And
of course, on the other end of the rainbow was Uncle Norman Swain, Billy Bouncer from the Peter's Palace Party in the 1940s and 1950s. And I guess they were both heroes of mine for different reasons, but people who I grew to become very fond of as friends, but enjoyed their work as announcers. And for you, I suppose, Uncle Jeff Cork.
Well, yes, but I never got to hear Uncle Jeff on the radio. Sadly, his radio career was long before I was born.
Yes.
But no, for me, radio heroes would be, the first ones that spring to mind are Gavin Wood and Molly Meldrum, when they used to do the breakfast session. Gavin Wood did the brekkie session on Eon FM, and Molly used to join him every Tuesday and Thursday, and that was great radio. I used to love that. Also, the D Generation, when they were also doing breakfast on Eon/Triple M.
Yeah.
And, of course, Black as an Unca on this very station.
I know. And perhaps my early radio work too on 3AK. Did that make an impression?
Never heard you. I'm sorry.
And by the way, you'll be keen to know that today, September 27, Jeff Cork opened GTV9 in Melbourne on this day in 1956.
Is that right?
From the transmitter up at Mount Dandenong.
Yes, where he introduced a movie that they were going to show later that night.
That's right.
And an entertaining Terry Toon cartoon.
Absolutely.
I remember that particular phrase.
And of course, when we see that replayed on television, that wasn't the original transmission.
No, it was re-recorded.
It was a mock-up, as I think Bruce Gingell did for TCN.
Yes.
Hey, here's a familiar piece of music.
And isn't that a great piece of music and a fitting piece of music to use when you're doing a talk radio show? And the man who grabbed that and made it his own is Luke Bona, and he joins us now. G'day, Luke.
Hey, how are we all?
Excellent.
You know, it's harder to get to you than it is to Frank Sinatra.
I know. Look, I was sitting here doing everything. My hands didn't leave my wrists. I don't know what happened.
Oh, no, we've been chasing you for 10 minutes, but boy, can we ad-lib.
Well, it's not Luke's fault. It's our dodgy equipment that's not getting through.
But were you impressed with all the ad-libs, Luke?
Oh, you were tap dancing beautifully.
Hey, listen, it's really, really good to catch you prior to the start of your new week, because we want to get to know you better, and so many people in Melbourne, like ourselves, are huge fans of yours. And where'd you go to school, for example?
I went to school on Sydney's northern beaches, at a place called Narrabeen, which features actually in the Beach Boys song Surfing USA. If you listen to the second verse, it goes, Australia's Narrabeen. So it was a real surf culture. You know the movie and the TV series Puberty Blues?
Yeah.
Well, that was set in the Cronulla Shire, but very similar to the way I grew up. You know, it was a surfing culture, and Sandman panel vans and Chico rolls. You know, it was very similar to what you saw on that program.
That whole 60s, 70s style thing. Well, I've got two brothers who are surfers, but I've just never been able to hang five. Never got the hang of it.
No, me too. Me too. It's funny. I went to school with a bloke called Simon Anderson, who was a world champion and very famous. His brother Michael was our school captain. He was a surfer. There was a bloke called Michael Novikov, who was a 4 times world kneeboard champion in my class, and I'm surrounded by all this surfing culture, and I couldn't do it either. I love body surfing. I love the beach, and I love all of that. I could never get up.
So did you stand on the side of the beach and just commentate on the surfing? That's how you got into radio?
Yeah. That's right. The funny thing is, I grew up. I was listening to some of your radio heroes, Simon, there, and obviously they're all very Melbourne-based.
Yes.
Because back in our day, Simon, there wasn't this networking, was there? And Melbourne is very Melbourne, and Sydney's very Sydney.
That's right, yeah. So you need to go sort of right back to the Jack Davey and Bob Dyer shows to get back to where networking sort of last left us.
Oh, and that's right. And Jack Davey did it beautifully, and Bob Dyer. They did it well. I'll ask you, Phil, why do you think some people work on both cities and some people just don't? Why did Jack Davey work?
Well, he and Bob Dyer were both successful. Unfortunately, for Jack Davey, by the time television started, he was a very sick man. And although he was a huge radio star, he looked so gaunt and so ill on television and died soon after TV began, that his halcyon days were definitely on radio, as were Bob Dyer's. But it seems very hard for interstate personalities to click in Melbourne. John Laws has never worked in Melbourne, for example.
No.
Bob Rogers...
And Darren Hinch didn't work in Sydney.
No,
that's
absolutely.
Right, yeah.
And yet you are getting, Midnight to Dawn, in all humility, you're getting huge figures at the moment.
Well, I'm just myself. I don't, and Simon, you know this. I'm just myself. I just open the microphone, we have a chat, and it's a family. It's a family.
You're right. I think what it comes down to ultimately with Midnight to Dawn, there's a good mix, and I say this of both yourself and Alan Pearsall, who does the weekend radio shows across the network, the mid-dawns across the network. The two of you have a great ability to be just lovely guys, but also can handle the news issues as well.
Yeah.
But without it being desk thumping, Alan Jones, I'm here to change the world. It's you cover it beautifully, but you're good companionship as well.
Yeah, well, I don't want to tell people what to think. We raise issues during the program, but the program is, I think, the most fun when we go off sideways, right off on a tangent, and it has a life of its own.
Yeah.
And you go, hang the script, let's go this way.
Yeah.
Exactly. We've often said with our show, with Bruce and Phil and myself producing down here, we come in with all these plans. Oh, we'll talk about this tonight, and we've got that ready to go, and all this. And then someone rings in and says, "Oh, I've spilt red wine on my carpet," and for the next 2 hours, all you get is stain removal calls.
It's spot on. Yeah, someone was saying the other day, if the two Western Australian teams get into the grand final, we should move the grand final from the MCG to Western Australia. Well,
cat amongst pigeons.
And in the Sydney NRL, the National Rugby League, Melbourne got beaten, so we've got the North Queensland Cowboys and Brisbane going to ANZ Stadium in Sydney. And the argument there is, should the grand final go to Suncorp? We might talk about that this morning, but I don't care.
well, you see, you've hit the nail on the head. The success of your program is, Luke, I believe that it's all embracing, that you have that very clever knack of sort of including in everybody from all different parts of Australia, so that your show is of universal appeal.
Well, I'd like to think it doesn't matter where it's coming from. It's a radio show that goes into cars and into people's houses.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't matter where it's originating from. It's where it is delivered to is the important thing, don't you reckon?
Absolutely. There was a duo who did the National Drive show for Austereo for years, going back to the 90s, Tony Martin and Mick Malloy, the Martin Malloy show. And they always, Tony Martin's philosophy was always that the show was coming out of Dubbo, because no one ever quite knew where Dubbo was. It could have been New South Wales, could have been Victoria, but no one cared.
Oh, how funny.
That's very funny. It's funny, I've got family in Dubbo.
Hey, now, look, Bona, we're talking Remember When, and you mentioned going to school in Narrabri. That sounds pretty posh to me.
Narrabeen?
Oh, yeah. On the coast, wasn't it?
Sorry?
On the coast, isn't it? Narrabeen?
Yeah, northern beaches of Sydney. No, it's not posh. In fact, the rugby league team is Manly Warringah, and everyone calls them the Silvertails. But there are probably more fibro homes along the northern beaches than there are in the western suburbs of Sydney. But it was a big furphy, and it was a great way of stirring up rivalry. No, Narrabeen, it's a little coastal holiday place. It's hard to get to. They call it the Insular Peninsula because people don't move out of there. They sort of stay where they are. But it was. I was born on the lake on the edge of Narrabeen Lake, and we fished and we prawned and we did all that. It was a wonderful place to grow up. In fact, the road that I grew up in was called Carefree Road. How good is that?
Wow. Yeah, that's appropriate.
It's like something out of a domestic comedy in Hollywood, isn't it?
It is. But and I had two parents that were sort of encouraging me to go off and do whatever I wanted to do in radio. Dad was an art director of a small advertising agency, and Mum, she did all sorts of things, but she promoted the jazz musician Don Burrows.
Yes.
For about 10 years, so I got to meet all these wonderful musicians, and I was very lucky, really lucky.
Now, where did the love of radio come from?
Well, I've always loved the wireless. I've always been a big consumer of radio, as you are, but I tell you what happened. I was at the Royal Easter Show, and I would have been about 10 or 11, and my dad said, look, here's $5, you go off and you can go on your rides, and I was walking up Sideshow Alley, and there was the 2UW outside broadcast van, and Malcolm T. Elliott and his sidekick Peter Shanahan were doing an outside broadcast from the Easter show, and I used to listen to them, and I stood there for an hour with my jaw on the ground, and I was watching them clown around, and I remember Malcolm was hitting Peter with a rolled-up newspaper, and they're having so much fun, and I said, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, good fun. It's good to see the people you love in action, isn't it?
Oh, I couldn't believe it. And it was very clever because they were the breakfast announcers on 2UW in Sydney. Remember the old 2UW in Kent Street, Philip?
Oh, yes.
But they very cleverly put their breakfast stars on in the middle of the day on a Saturday so that we could see them.
Yes.
And I couldn't believe I was watching the people on the radio.
Yes.
And that was it. That was a defining moment for me.
That sort of hypnotised you. Did you get to meet Malcolm T later?
Well, I tell you I did. Eventually when I went back to 2GB, 3AW's sister station in Sydney, I eventually moved on to weekends, and Malcolm was my opposition on 2UE. And after about a year, I beat him in the ratings.
Are you kidding?
And I met him. And then he jumped back and beat me, and our program director, John Brennan, knew him, and I said, look, I heard he wasn't well, and I rang him to say, look, congratulations, and then he left to I went on holidays, and he filled in for me.
Oh, it's like musical chairs, isn't it?
How good was that?
Oh, not bad, mate. The wheel had turned full circle.
I know, I couldn't believe it, and that was the same bloke 30 years earlier, I was looking at in an OB caravan.
I know, yeah, he was your inspiration. Hey, listen, Luke, tell me something about your Aboriginal background. This is fascinating to me.
Well, it is. It's a funny story. I was adopted by my mum and dad, Brian and Joan Bona, in 1962. My mother was an Aboriginal woman from birth. She lived on a mission, and she fell pregnant with me. And look, I won't go too far into it, but she couldn't keep me. She couldn't keep me for a number of reasons. So she put me up for adoption at the Crown Street Women's Hospital, and I was adopted by Brian and Joan Bona. But I always looked different. I looked different to everybody in my family, and I always felt different. Like I'd go down the street for bread and milk, and I'd come back 2 days later, you know. Anyway, I always knew that I was adopted. They didn't sit me down and tell me. I just always knew. I would, when a little boy might say, "Where did I come from?" They would say, "You were the nicest in the hospital, so we chose you." So, so I always knew. But it was always ticking away at me. I always felt the urge. I wanted to get some closure. Some people do and some people don't. I have an adopted sister. She didn't care. But for me, it was something I had to follow through. Well, they changed the laws in New South Wales so that you could get hold of your original birth certificate. And I did, and there was my mother's name and place of birth, and it said that she was Aboriginal. And that answered a lot of questions for me, but not enough. I continued to try and look for her. Long story short, we found her, and that was about 20 years ago. And I have an amazing Indigenous family in Burke and Dubbo, as I just said, and it was an amazing journey. And it doesn't always work out in a romantic way. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. It's a work in progress, but I'm very, very proud to have found my roots. But Philip and Simon, the really important thing is that the parents who adopted me, they're still mum and dad.
Yes.
You know, often when you hear these stories of adopted kids finding their parents, the forgotten people are the people who put in the hard yards.
Yeah.
And the people who looked after you when you had the mumps and the measles and toothaches and nightmares and put shoes on your feet and packed your lunch. You know, they're the people who really did the hard yards. So I found my family, but I've never forgotten the people who raised me.
No, and you know, Luke, telling the story as you are, it sort of explains to me your humanity.
Oh, really?
Yes, it does. It's like pieces of the jigsaw come together. Fascinating story for you, and one that must give hope to a lot of people who have been adopted.
That's right. That's right. And you know, everyone's different. As I said, my sister, who came from a different family, she had no inkling at all to find her birth parents, and that was her decision, and mine was my decision. But so everyone's a bit different. There was a fantastic television program. It's the only program I think that's ever made me cry, and it's called. It was on the Lifestyle Channel where it was a program out of the UK where they put adopted kids back with their families. Long Lost Families, it's called.
Yeah.
Have a look at that when it comes back. That is really good because sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. It's a really good program. It's called Long Lost Families.
Hey, buddy, we have something in common. I used to watch that on a Friday night on Lifestyle, yes.
What did you think?
Oh, it touched my heart.
Did you tear up?
Oh, you couldn't help it.
Couldn't help it, I know.
I mean, they were British stories, but they could relate to families here, of course.
I would love to do that show here in Australia. I would love to do it here and host it here. I don't know how we go about it, Phil. I don't know what we do, but I reckon there's a market for it here.
Yes.
And you think about the stolen generations and not just the Indigenous kids, but you look at that other television show on Channel 9. What's it called? You know.
The one where they're just tracing the family histories?
No, the one where they talk about the kids that were taken away from parents during the 50s when unwed mothers were not the thing and girls from the bush would go to the city, have their babies and come back. And there's a whole generation of those kids.
Yeah, Love Child?
Thank you. That's it, Love Child. And that's set in my era. That's why that's an interesting show. But I reckon there's room for that show in Australia, don't you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be very good, actually. We need to be doing more stuff like that, I think.
I reckon, yeah.
Look, let's take a break. Can you spare a few more minutes for us?
Oh, I love it. Thank you.
Okay, come back with you after this.
To 11 on 3AW. We are with Luke Bona this evening, having a chat and delving into Luke's interesting history. And we now turn the question, Luke, to your radio career in itself. So where was the first experience of setting foot in a radio studio?
Well, my first job was at 2GB, 3AW sister station, and I was an office boy. I applied for jobs everywhere because I wanted to be a sound engineer, having grown up with Don Burrows and the jazz musicians, and I knew I wasn't a good enough player, but I had a good ear, and I thought I could maybe be a sound engineer. And I wrote 106 handwritten letters. I got 2 replies, one from Channel 7, one from 2GB. They were both owned by Fairfax at that point. And they both said, thank you for your application, but sorry, we don't have anything for you. And I went back to school. About September of that year, I got home and Mum said, guess what? 2GB have just rung and they're looking for an office boy, someone to run mail around Sydney. And I said, great. And I went in for the interview. Ron Hurst was the general manager. He used to run 7 Records, Philip. Does that ring a bell?
I know the name.
Yeah. He was the general manager, and I got the job.
Good.
And so I ran mail, but I spent every second every second of every moment learning the equipment.
Yes.
And Jimmy Hannon was doing mornings,
Right.
Yeah.
and the great Dieter Cobb did the afternoon program.
Yeah, what year are we talking about?
1978.
Okay.
1978. And I learnt the equipment, and eventually I got a job up in the tape room because there was a panel operator who went, I think, off to 2MO at Gunnedah. His name was Graham Mott.
Oh, you're kidding.
And Graham left, which created a gap in the tape room.
Yes.
And I became a panel operator, and then next thing you know, I was panelling Dieter Cobb. What a way to learn.
Yeah, and what a lovely guy Jimmy Hannon is.
Jimmy, well, you won't believe this. My partner, Nikki, the Minister for War and Finance, she runs, she has a little window cleaning business, and she does his windows up at Minkara Retirement Village at Bayview.
Because he and his wife were living at Coffs Harbour for many years.
Yeah, I think he's up at Minkara now, and she said he remembers me. Well, I don't know whether he does or he doesn't, but I'm very flattered. But yeah, he was really good.
Yeah, one of the nicest people in the business. Now, I want to go back even further. I want to know, Luke Bona, who your first crush was. Do you remember her name?
Yep, I can tell you straight away.
At school, maybe?
Barbara Eden from My Dream of Jeannie.
Oh,
Are
really?
you kidding?
Really?
Oh,
I'm with you there.
imagine having. And she calls Larry Hagman master.
Oh.
He keeps her in a bottle. Are you all kidding? Barbara Eden. Seriously.
Yeah, okay.
Another at the same time for me was Barbara Feldon, Agent 99 from Get Smart.
Oh, yes.
The women are just stunning on television.
I like Mary Ann on Gilligan's Island too with the blue denim shorts.
Oh, yeah. I was a Mary Ann fan, not so much a Ginger fan.
No, Mary Ann.
I wouldn't have said no to a hug and a kiss from Ginger, but Mary Ann first in line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in real life, you know, from your school days, can you remember your first kiss?
Yeah. Yeah, I can. We're not naming names, though.
Oh, no, hey, initials will do.
NC. She was my first girlfriend. I remember she was the first girl I held hands with.
Yeah.
And that was magic. Do you remember the first time you held a girl's hand?
Oh, yeah. I think I was 4 or 5. I'll tell you her name. Her name is Anne Seagraves. That was her unmarried name. And she phoned me once and said, let's get together. And she lived in Portsea, which is sort of a posh part of Melbourne. And we planned to have a reunion, and she never got back to me.
Oh, I can go one better. Okay, I would have been about 6 or 7, and Mum and Dad were both working, and we had a Dial-An Angel live-in housekeeper, right?
Yes.
And she was a young girl, and her name was Julia, and she was beautiful. She was beautiful, and she was my first crush.
So where'd you meet your wife? Was that love at first sight?
Nikki and I went to school together. We weren't romantic at school, but we were really good mates. And she plays the trumpet and the cornet, and we played in a band together when we were in second form, which was, what do they call that? Year 8 now. And we used to. She lived near me, and we used to walk to school. And she often had a heavy port in one hand and her trumpet case in the other, so I would carry her trumpet to school for her.
Oh, how romantic.
And then we were best friends. And then we went our separate ways in 1980, and she went to Perth and met a bloke and went off and got married, and I went off on another way. And then the year is 2000. You ready for this story?
Yeah.
The year is 2000, and I'm doing weekend mornings on 2GB. And the Manly Jazz Festival, which is a huge event, is coming up. And the director is a bloke called Johnny Spate. Jazz fans would know that name. And he used to be our band leader when we were kids. Yeah. He's come in to do an interview. And I said to him in the course of conversation off air, I said, do you ever hear from Nikki Matthews? And he said, no, she left in 1980 and went travelling around the world. You and she were great buddies, weren't you? I said, yes. No. Oh, so anyway, the next day, which was a Sunday, he's standing at Warriewood, which is another little suburb up the road. He's standing in a cafe waiting for his hamburgers and chips, and a pair of hands go round his eyes from behind. Guess who turns around?
It's Nikki.
Nikki Matthews.
Oh, no.
The next day.
What are the odds?
I know. So he said, I was just talking about you. She said, what? He he said, I was talking about you yesterday to a bloke on the radio. She said, what? She said, who's that? He said, Luke Bona. She goes, you're kidding, he's in radio? He said, yep. She goes, that'd be right. he used to get sent out of class and get the cane for talking too much. Now he gets paid for it. That'd be right.
And by then you were both on the loose and fancy free again, were you?
Yep, we've both been through unhappy relationships. We were both free. We caught up the next Monday or the Tuesday, and it was just love. It was just unbelievable.
How fabulous. Now, so you've been together for how long?
9 years now.
Yeah.
Lovely.
9 years, but we knew each other from we've known each other since 1972.
I want to know how much she loves you. Does she stay up all night and listen to your show and have a hot breakfast ready for you when you get home?
Yeah, no, thank you. No.
Good luck with that.
But she gets up early when I get home. I get home about 6:15.
Yeah.
And she comes out and we have a cup of tea and we talk about what we talked about, and then and then I'll have an hour's sleep. But no, she's a huge supporter. She's a great intellect, and she's a wonderful sound piece. When we talk about issues that we might bring up on the program, she's got a great opinion on everything. She's really common sense.
Yeah.
She's so helpful.
Is she going to Vietnam with you?
She is the Minister for War and Finance, or sometimes she's known as the Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah.
She's coming along, and I think it's 4 weeks away.
And then next year's India, I know.
We're going to India in March next year, yes.
Yeah.
So that's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, speaking of travel, where did you go on your honeymoon?
Well, we didn't have a honeymoon. We just kept... we live on holidays on the northern beaches.
Yeah.
So no, there's no honeymoon, but we're seriously, it's just so great to have your partner who's your best friend, isn't it?
It is. It's lovely, yes.
It really is, yeah.
You're lucky. Mine doesn't particularly care what I do for a living. She wouldn't care unless I was on Triple M or something.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
Hey, look, we've really, really enjoyed this chat. I've been saying to Simon for months, I want to get Luke on,
Well, look, it's probably been not very interesting, but look, I was so flattered, Phil, when you asked me to come on, because I think this program, I think Nightline's the best radio in Australia. I really do. I love it, and the relaxed style and the memories that come back, and the fact that it is all organic, and you never know where you're going to end up. I love it.
Now, just before we leave, that's very kind of you, Luke, and thank you on behalf of Bruce, who of course isn't here as well. He'll be back in a week or so from now. Before we let you go, though, we have a mystery voice has rung in who wants to say hello to you. The mystery guest, say hello to Luke Bona, please.
Hello, Luke, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you on Thursday morning at 1:30.
It's Mr. Quigley.
That sort of takes the mystery out of it.
It's Mr. Quigley.
Yeah.
We have fun, don't we, Gerald?
We do, Luke, and I've been listening into your chat, and it's been absolutely sparkling. And what a story, and well done.
Oh, look, thank you. And Simon, I sent you that Elise Simmons song. I'd love you to have a listen to it one day.
Yeah, I just saw the email come through. I'll give it a whirl during the news and have a listen.
Just let me explain what it is quickly. She's a country superstar, Elise Simmons. Google her, and she came into the studio about 6 months ago. Gerald, do you reckon?
That's right.
And she was playing her latest song live here in the studio, and because of that encounter, she tours a lot. She travels a lot after midnight, so she's got her app, so she can listen to Luke on the radio, and she was really touched how the program touches people, and she wrote this song, and it's being nominated for Best Bush Ballad at Tamworth next year.
How fabulous.
It's called The Greatest Companion, and it's not about me. It was inspired by the program, but she and I have dedicated it to every radio presenter, you and Philip and Bruce and everybody who touches their audience. So it's really for us. I'd love you to have a listen to it.
I look forward to that, Gerald. I hear you later in the week, and I always enjoy your chats with Jade Hurley too, Luke. They're great fun.
Oh, how good is that?
Oh, yes, mate. You've hit the jackpot. And also, thanks so much for tonight. It's given us such a buzz, and I know you're back on here with us after midnight.
Yeah, I can't wait. Champing at the bit. Have a great night, everybody.
Luke Bona, special guest on. Remember...
You know, Phil, Luke Bona was a fabulous guest to have on the show, and we enjoyed that conversation very much.
Hey, yeah, and we talk to him from time to time. There's more to Luke than meets the eye.
Yeah, there certainly is.
I've only ever met him once. A beaut bloke, as you'll agree.
I've never had the pleasure of meeting him. I've filled in for him, and I'll be doing so again. He mentioned that cruise that's coming, or you
He's
mentioned
off to Vietnam, yes, with his wife, Nikki.
So I'll be covering for him for those 2 weeks. But it'll be nice to actually put a face to the name when I see him one day.
Well, you won't be disappointed. I wonder if he's done any TV over the years. He didn't talk about that.
Well, you didn't ask him.
I didn't get time. I couldn't get a word in.
We could have done hours.
I couldn't get a word in.
A great conversation.